Good morning and welcome. I'd like to welcome all of you who are here in person today and those who are joining us online. No matter who you are, no matter who you love, no matter where you are, you're welcome to worship with us this morning. My name is Sharon Fichtorn, and I'm serving as your worship associate this morning, along with our guest minister, Reverend Andrew Weber, our musician, Joy Thiessen. And I want to give thanks to our tech team, our online host, and the members of the hospitality team for their support this morning. Reverend Andrew serves the Thomas Paine Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Collegeville, PA, and he currently lives in Newark, Delaware with his wife and 2 children. Andrew's ministry is one of helping people and communities live into their best selves. He reflects on living a faith-informed life on an online blog called How to Drive Like a Minister. Sounds interesting. If you're viewing this service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning if that's helpful for you. And if you'd like to talk with other online participants after the service, there will be a virtual coffee hour. Just stay logged in and you'll be invited into a breakout room. Our opening hymn this morning is When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. Please rise in spirit and join us in singing. The words are also available on the screen. Please remain standing and join us in the recitation of our covenant. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So good to be here again. We start our worship as we do every Sunday, joining Unitarian Universalists around the country, joining Unitarians across the globe this morning as we light the flaming chalice, the symbol of our free and challenging and supportive faith. These words by the Oberlin UU Fellowship in Oberlin, Ohio. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for each other, and faith in ourselves. Also, to be welcoming to whomever we meet, and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together.
Each Sunday, we gather in community, carrying whatever we are carrying. We may be full of joy or sorrow, and we honor those feelings by dropping stones into this bowl of water. Just as the stones are held by the water, so are all who drop them held in love by this community. All are invited to join in this ritual, and those online can join us by entering joys or sorrows into the chat. I'll drop a final stone for those who are unable to be with us this morning and those of us who are listening online. Please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing Spirit of Life and following along with the movements on the screen.
Our faith draws from many, many sources. So in picking a reading, that means the whole world is open. The reading today is from The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, a book by Rachel Joyce. In her words, "Excuse me," a gentle voice said above him. "Is this seat free?" He shook himself back to the present. A well-dressed man was standing to his left and pointing to the chair opposite. Harold wiped his eyes, surprised and ashamed to discover that once again he had been crying. He told the man that the seat was indeed free and urged him to take it. The man wore a smart suit and deep blue shirt with small pearl cufflinks. His body was lean and graceful. His thick silver hair was swept back from his face. Even as he sat, he folded his legs so that the crease of his trousers fell in line with his knees. He lifted his hands to his lips, holding them there in an elegant steeple. He looked the sort of man Harold wished he had been, distinguished, as Maureen would say. Maybe he was staring too hard because after the waitress had delivered a pot of Ceylon tea, no milk, and toasted treacle, the gentleman said with feeling, "Goodbyes are always hard." He poured tea and added lemon. Harold explained that he was walking to a woman he had let down in the past. He hoped it was not a goodbye. He very much hoped his friend would live. He didn't look the man in the eye, but instead focused on the toasted treacle. It was the size of the plate. The butter had melted like golden syrup. The man sliced one half into slim soldiers and listened as he ate. The cafe was loud and busy, the windows so steamed they were opaque. Harold marveled at the neatness with which the gentleman posted the tea cake between his teeth and mopped his fingers after each mouthful. "Would you like some?" said the gentleman. I couldn't. Harold raised both hands as if blocking the way. "I only want half. It seems a shame to waste the other. Please, share it." The silver-haired gentleman took his cut-up pieces and arranged them on a paper napkin. He slid the plate with the intact half toward Harold. "Can I ask you a question?" he said. "You seem a decent sort of man." Harold nodded because the tea cake was already in his mouth and he couldn't exactly spit it out again. He tried to stop the butter from running by scooping it up with his fingers, but it shot down his wrist and oiled his sleeve. I come to Exeter every Thursday. I get the train in the morning and I return in the early evening. I come to meet a young man. We do things. No one knows about this part of my life. The silver-haired gentleman paused to pour a fresh cup of tea. The tea cake was lodged in Harold's throat. He could feel the man's eyes searching for his, but couldn't possibly look up. "Can I go on?" said the gentleman. Harold nodded. He gave a gulp that sent the tea cake squeezing past his tonsils. It hurt all the way down. "I like what we do. Otherwise, I would not come here. But I have also grown fond of him. He fetches me a glass of water afterwards, and sometimes he talks. His English is not so good. I believe he had polio as a child, and sometimes it causes him to limp." For the first time, the silver-haired gentleman faltered, as if he was fighting something inside. He lifted his tea, but his fingers trembled when he steered the cup to his mouth, so that liquid spilled over the rim and slopped over his tea cake. "He moves me, this young man," he said. "He moves me beyond words." Harold looked away. He wondered if he could get up, but realized he couldn't. He had eaten half the silver-haired gentleman's tea cake, after all. And yet he felt it was an intrusion to witness the man's helplessness when he had been so kind and appeared so elegant. He wished the man hadn't spilled his tea and that he would mop it up, but he didn't. He just sat, bearing it and not caring his tea cake would be ruined. The gentleman continued with difficulty. The words were slow and spread apart. "I lick his trainers. It's part of what we do. But I noticed only this morning that he had a small hole in the toe." His voice quivered. "I would like to buy him another pair, but I don't want to offend him. And yet equally, I can't bear the thought of him walking the streets with a hole in his trainers. His foot will get wet. What shall I do?" His mouth folded over itself as it were pressing back an avalanche of pain. The silver-haired gentleman was in truth nothing like the man Harold had imagined him to be. He was a chap like himself, with a unique pain, and yet there would be no knowing that if you passed him on the street or sat opposite him in a cafe and did not share his treacle. Harold pictured the gentleman on a station platform, smart in his suit, looking no different than anyone else. It must be the same all over England. People were buying milk or filling their cars with petrol or even posting letters. And what no one else knew was the appalling weight of the thing they were carrying inside. The inhuman effort it took sometimes to be normal and a part of things that appeared both easy and everyday. The loneliness of that, moved and humbled, he passed his paper napkin. There ends our reading for today.
At this time in our service, we ask for your financial support. The second Sunday of every month is Share the Plate Sunday, and our entire plate collection is donated to a deserving organization. This month's recipient is Chester Eastside. Chester Eastside offers invaluable programs for children and adults, providing the resources needed to improve outcomes for the entire community. Their initiatives help kids defy the odds by meeting basic human needs through food and clothing distributions, while also providing a safe environment for education and skill development. You can text your donation to the number on the screen, and if you would like to leave a check, there are 2 boxes in the back of the sanctuary that you can deposit checks in. Thank you.
I'm going to talk a little bit about our faith history of Unitarianism in Transylvania. And I have a personal story about Unitarianism in Transylvania, but when one talks about Unitarianism in Transylvania, all the stories have to start earlier than some of us in the United States may be used to. So in my sharing of a story from a 2018 pilgrimage that I took in Transylvania, I need to back up a little bit to get the context. And so let's start a little bit earlier than 2018, and I'm thinking maybe like the 1500s to like get the full background there. Yeah. But really, I mean, we need a little bit of history before we start talking about Unitarianism in Transylvania. In the 16th century, 1500s, we remember our history, our religious history, when the Reformation was spreading through Europe, when Catholicism, papal authority were being challenged by the likes of Martin Luther, John Calvin. And in Transylvania, a major figure, especially through our Unitarian Universalist eyes, is Francis David, or in Hungarian, David Ferenc. That's why you may have heard both of those names. And David started his ministry as a Catholic, converted to Lutheranism, then Calvinism, and finally came to Unitarianism, which may be a familiar path to some of us here, searching and searching for that more liberal way. In 1568, David persuaded the King of Hungary and the Prince of Transylvania, John Sigismund Zapolya, that's in Hungarian, Zapolya János Zsigmond, to sign an edict of religious tolerance. And we may know some of this from a Unitarian Universalist history if we've seen or heard. This is the Edict of Torda. The Edict of Torda is where we look, and all religious liberals look, for that first glimmer of a free faith based on tolerance. The Edict of Torda in 1568. Now, a little bit after the Edict of Torda, in this time of religious exploration and theological self-discovery, there was a group of Unitarian Christians who started adopting elements of Judaism. Now, this makes sense because many of the reformers wanted to go back to the roots of Christianity, and that would logically lead some to the root of Christianity itself, which was Judaism, that religion which preceded it. So these Unitarian Jews in Transylvania became known as Sabbatarians, named after their observance of the Sabbath. In a land legendary for religious tolerance, there formed a group of Jews by choice, who had no ancestral, no blood ties to Israel, but ties of faith, ties of religious conviction. Now, this is an extremely unusual occurrence culturally, but sadly, the history of this small community parallels the hate, parallels the persecution which Jewish people saw all over the world. And although we laud the 16th century as a time of religious freedom and tolerance in Transylvania, it was conditional tolerance. The 1568 Edict of Torda was for Catholics, Lutherans, and Unitarians. It did not include tolerance of Jews, whether Judaism was chosen or inherited. So the Sabbatarians did not gain many adherents over the centuries, and by the 19th century, there was a minority in only one small village, that of Bozód Újfalu. And in 2 world wars, this community, along with most of Hungarian Transylvania, was handed back and forth between political entities, depending on which side they were on, who was winning at that time. This village was, as were many villages, part of Hungary, then part of Romania, and then back again. Some of the Sabbatarians were sent to ghettos, others killed at the hands of the Nazi regime. And at the end of the Second World War, Hungarian Transylvanians, if you've ever gone on a sister church, partner church trip, you'll know that Hungarian Transylvanians, and including this village of Bozód Újfalu, found themselves minorities inside Romania. The people that we call our siblings in faith, both the Unitarians and the Sabbatarians, found themselves doubly minorities They were minorities by religion, and they were minorities by ethnicity, claiming Hungarian ethnicity being in Romania, claiming Unitarian or Judaism as their religion being in a mainly Christian country. Sadly, the hardships didn't end there. Romania was under communist rule throughout the mid to late 1900s, and the last communist leader, Nicolae Ceausescu, was especially harsh to minorities. And right before Ceausescu, his fall from power, he decided to eradicate Transylvanian Hungarian communities by destroying their villages and moving the populations to housing estates. Bozód Újfalu fell victim to this plan, and in 1989, the river which flowed through the village was dammed, the buildings flooded, and the inhabitants moved out. The Sabbatarian people in the village of Bozód Újfalu were no more. Now, I've moved a little bit, and this is recent history. This is in most of our lifetimes. The village was flooded, and its inhabitants displaced 33 years ago. We have memory of when that was, for many of us. All that was left of this village, imagine your hometown. All that was left were a few buildings reaching up above the surface of an artificial lake, and some tombstones of an old Sabbatarian graveyard up on a hillside. Over the years, this too has been eroding, as any building would do underwater, and now the building ruins have fallen into the lake. You used to be able to see the steeple of a church, now just placid water. The history and my personal story here overlap. This is where they overlap at the outskirts of Bozód Újfalu, where a memorial park has been erected. The current regime, the current people looking back and saying, we have lost something here. And this memorial park is a pathway which mirrors what the village used to look like. The pathway mirroring the streets that used to be there, with photos of the village and memorial markers at the site of each flooded building. One can now virtually walk on a path mimicking the streets of this flooded city. My most recent pre-COVID trip to Transylvania was a walking pilgrimage with a focus on mindfulness. And when our mindfulness walking group reached Bozód Újfalu, we stopped. We stopped to take a moment to wander through the memorial, to look at the photos, to think about the religion, the culture, the religious and cultural intolerance which occurred. This was part of a walking pilgrimage, which I co-led. I co-led a walking pilgrimage and was tasked with spiritual and logistical leadership. Now, if you think that being in charge of Unitarian Universalists, a diverse, confident group of people, is hard, which it is, try to do it as you're walking through woods that are home to feral dogs, bears, and somewhat rustic accommodations. Needless to say, it sort of honed in me a certain set of parenting and ministry skills, this walking meditation. My mindfulness meditation became walking behind everyone and keeping eyes on those people ahead of me. A ministry quite literally pastoral, as I was pastoring those people, making sure they were safe in their own meditation, in their own walking. I continued my shepherding duties as the group shed their packs and began walking through memorial markers at Bozód Újfalu. So I was watching everyone as they were walking through this memorial. And while doing this, I took note of a boy who was selling hand-woven trinkets and milling about. This happens in most any memorial, most any place where a visitor with extra cash might stop. And how did I respond to this youth? How did I respond to this young person around us? I responded as a scared foreigner. I assumed that he was either going to rifle through our unaccompanied bags or that he was going to interrupt our deeply spiritual experience. Because we were having a spiritual experience, he should stay in his own spot. I did the classic racist, ageist thing that so many young men of color experience all the time in our country. I hung back from our group and I kept an eye on him and an eye on our bags. And you know what happened? He came up to me and started chatting. He reached out to me over the gap that I had constructed. Our conversation started shallow and grew deeper. Very shallow. First, he wanted to know if one of the trip participants was Jean-Claude Van Damme. This, of course, was not the case. And as we got to talking, he opened up. He opened up to me and told me that his grandmother used to live in this flooded town. Not only that, but he showed me that looking at one of the plaques, at one of the photos very closely, we could see her stoic face looking back at us through the house window. So there I was, living into my racism, my ageism, my cultural privilege, and being shown very precisely what I missed, namely this boy's humanity. Martin Buber, a Jewish theologian, said, "When two people relate to each other authentically and humanly, God is the electricity that surges between them." How humbled and honored I was to have that authenticity and that humanity offered to me. And this is where the stories start to come into the theological. In the reading from The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, Harold assumes a lot about the stranger, whom he calls the silver-haired gentleman. In my story, I assume a lot about that local boy at Bozod Uifalu. And we were both surprised when instead we found a human being. This is precisely why the most radical thing we can do is introduce people to one another. And when I was first thinking about this topic, I was like, yeah, the most radical thing, introduce. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And what I'm going to preach about is getting past that introduction, getting to where we can really make connections. I thought that was the call, to go past introductions, go into deep relationships. But now I realize it's not going past introductions. That's not it at all. The call is to introduce people. To introduce people, to recognize what we call the inherent worth and dignity, what others call the divine spark, what Martin Buber called the spark of God, the person part of us. Not an introduction, hi, I am Andrew, but an introduction to who I am, what my story is, possibly what my dreams are, and what pain I hold on to in my heart. Those are the people we are introducing to one another, real people. The most radical thing we can do is introduce people to one another. What does this look like? Well, it looks like Harold Fry in the cafe. It looks like me talking with a local boy from Bozod Uifalu. It looks like being genuine and being whole and being vulnerable and being loving. I have another story, this one closer to home geographically. My wife and I have two children. You may have occasionally seen them running around here. At Peter's retirement party, they were running around here. Not today. Now, if you're a parent, or if you know parents, if you know anything about parenting is a lot of bargaining. It's a lot of bargaining. Now, in order to help persuade good habits, one of the bargains we do is we've used a sticker chart, where good action gets a sticker. And after some number of stickers, you get an award. You can earn an award that you can pick which award you want. And one award that we had was a trip to Dollar Tree, which frankly is one of the few stores where we can truthfully say, you may pick out anything here to buy. Right? Because it's all $1. And on one specific occasion, a few years ago, when the stickers were enough and we got the trip to Dollar Tree, my son picked out a canister of Pringles chips. Very excited about them. Very excited. We checked out and he didn't care at all. He promptly ignored and watched another customer buying Mylar helium balloons. with only the the amazement that only a 5 and a 3-year-old can muster. They both stood watching as the balloons were chosen, taken out of the drawers. I don't know if you've seen this. It's really quite interesting. They have a booklet of what number, and then they have the drawers, and you can pick the Mylar balloon. They unfold them. They stick them on the helium canister. They get blown up. Time. There's your balloon. And I was like, oh my, that's amazing. And the lady who was buying balloons, without hesitation, ordered 2 more balloons and gave them to us. We had some very, very happy children that day. I mean, they're unable to contain themselves and literally jumping with joy. And I'm almost crying. Why am I almost crying? Why does this touch me? I mean, it's not the Disney Princess or the Paw Patrol pictures on the balloons. That's not it. It moves me because that is exactly what I'm preaching about. That's exactly it. Actually taking the time, taking the energy to make a personal connection. I don't know this lady's name. I wouldn't recognize her again if I saw her. But there was a surge of electricity between us, between her and our family. She reached out to where our children were and made that introduction. She made that spark of God, spark of the divine. She recognized their inherent worth and dignity. She lived it. She reached out and made that connection. The call here, the call is to live our life-saving faith. The call is to recognize each other's inherent worth and dignity, to recognize the spark of the divine, to recognize God in our interactions, in our relationships. But not through just discourse, not through talking, and not only through those whom we know. I can stand here and talk about making personal connections until I'm blue in the face, but my words pale in comparison to a $2 gift of Mylar balloons. So from the 1500s in Transylvania to a few years ago in Delaware, the charge remains the same: to reach out with love and care, to introduce people to one another, to be open to those introductions, to make real connections. Make people wonder. Make people wonder why you are so kind. Make people wonder why you are so open and so loving, so ready for connections and real introductions. So go out into the world and do something radical. Amen. And as we do this, as we do something radical, let us rise in body or in spirit and sing, "We'll Build a Land."
As we extinguish our chalice, please join me in reciting the words printed on the screen. Although we now extinguish our chalice flame, may we hold its warmth in our hearts in all the days ahead. Again, I want to thank everyone who made today's worship possible, our tech team, our online host, our hospitality team members, and everyone who helped with setup, Joy for her music this morning, and our guest minister for his message. Thank you, Andrew. As a reminder, if you joined us online, you can join a breakout room at the end of the service for a virtual coffee hour. Thanks.
Let us join together in our benediction. If you feel comfortable, you may hold hands with those next to you. If not, that's okay. Put your hands up. And those on Zoom, you can put your hands up to make sure we are all connected virtually and in person. For those who come here seeking God, may God
go with you.
For those
who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it step by step. Blessed be.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that was a quick one.